I just want to do a quick plug, right, for the forensic concentration. If you haven't, I'm fond of it, but that you shouldn't listen to that. It's biased. But just so you know, like all of the classes that we do in the forensic concentration are all based on real cases. Like this semester, I'm doing mental illness and criminal justice. We're following 5 people through their journey from like the day they get arrested all through the criminal justice system. And we've got the police reports, we've got their psych reports, we've got the jail incident reports, we've got their interrogation, right, the clinical interview. And some of them commit some pretty serious crimes. And there's no book for the class, it's just all the real material from the real world that you get to look through and learn. And the same thing is true of the victims class, where aside from the first week, the other 13 or 14 weeks of class is a different crime every week. Robbery, elder abuse, murder, child exploitation. And we listen to an interview that I conducted with the actual victim that's like cut up. So we listen to little quotes from people who've survived that crime and then learn all the stuff we need to learn along the way. And the criminal behavior course is like exactly what it sounds like. Like everything you want to know about psychopaths and sex offenders and white nationalists and that kind of stuff. So I think they're interesting, but obviously not for everybody. Now, I realize this is like a brief overview and it's really quick and I want to answer your questions, but there's 2 questions that I always get, so I should probably just answer those first, and then I'll take specific questions, right? The first is, what is a typical day like? When you're a forensic psychologist, you're in a service industry, right? Most people don't think of it that way, but like they're paying you a good money by the hour, right? And when you're paying someone, I don't even know what the limit is, like more than $200 an hour, or in some cases more than $500 or $600 an hour, and you call them, you want an answer now because you're paying them a lot of money, right? And so a lot of my time is just spent sitting and waiting because court moves really slow and the discovery process moves really slow. And then all of a sudden, the attorney will be like, here you go, here's all the information. We need the report in 3 weeks. And then I'll get 600 pages of stuff I need to look through and body cam footage or interview footage. And I'll have to watch it all and write my report and call the attorney. And so it can kind of be feast or famine. Like for that reason, I only have like 3 cases going at one time because they always seem to hit at the same time and I get really busy. So some weeks all I do is work at Mason and I put in my time here, and other weeks I'm putting in 60, 70-hour weeks, right? So it's just how it works. Now it doesn't have to be like that. A lot of forensic psychologists work for the state. They work for a prison. They go, they do their evaluations, they testify, they do 9 to 5, right? They don't charge as much, but they like the stability. So you can have it both ways. But if you're going to do private work, it's going to be feast or famine. Like sometimes it's going to be pouring and you just have to deal with it, but you're making a lot of money. And other times you're just like, where did all the cases go? I'm not doing anything right now. So most of my time is actually, it's not like super interesting. Like this summer I was doing some like relatively high value white nationalist target for the government, and I was assessing him. And so I got to do some like cool travel. And it was kind of fun. And every once in a while I'll do like a project with the BAU, and that's kind of fun, even though their office is a hole. Definitely not like TV. It doesn't even have like a receptionist or anything. Like it's literally like behind a Waffle House. It's like a brick building, like it looks like and it should, because like they don't want everyone to know that that's where the BAU is. Because all of a sudden they'd have all sorts of like fanboys and fangirls knocking on the door, right? And they don't want that, so they keep a pretty low profile. So every once in a while I get to do cool stuff like that. But most of the time, it's me sitting in my house at 10 o'clock at night with a stack of 400 papers in front of me that I need to look through and figure out what the hell happened, right? And then put in chronological order so that I can write a report, right? And although like this one's an outlier, the last report I did over the summer was 76 single-space pages. 50 pages of that was background information. It was just that person's history that I had to like figure out and write down through all the documents, right? Now that's an outlier. Most of my reports are like 25 single-space pages, but still, right? It's a lot. So it's less like me doing cool stuff with the FBI or the government flying me out to some secure facility to talk to somebody, and more me sitting in a hotel room with a big stack of papers, typing and pulling my own hair out. Right? Which brings me to the second question, which is like most of the stuff is pretty nasty. Remember, like I don't get called unless someone's dead and everyone disagrees. And so it's changed in the last like 3 or 4 years. It used to be that like if there was an incident of police violence, like I used to just get police reports, maybe some security footage, like grainy stuff if there's happened to be a camera, but now I get body cam footage. It's like now anytime like something happens with officers and they ask me to evaluate the officers, like I'm getting body cam footage. And like you have to realize that like I'm gonna have to watch each body cam footage a couple times before I really wrap my head around exactly what happened and make sure I didn't miss anything. And so I'm sitting there watching this like 3 times in a row and then watching another video 3 times in a row. And at the end of every one of those videos, the guy dies. Like he gets shot. Like it's not the movies. Like I'm watching a real person whose name I know, whose parents hired an attorney who hired me. And he's dead, right? And like that's not easy. Like that can take a toll on you. And I totally understand why people would want to know, like what's the worst thing I've ever seen, because it's horrible. Like absolutely horrifying stuff, right? But I'm not going to tell you. And the reason I'm not going to tell you is like, you know when something like somebody's family member dies or somebody gets cancer and you hear about it and you're like, oh my God, I can't imagine. That's got to be so hard, right? And that's because you can't imagine. And you don't want to imagine. Right? Because seeing some of the stuff that we have to deal with is like ringing a bell that you can't unring, right? And if I start telling stories about horrible stuff, then that's going to be part of your world. And there isn't going to be anything that you can do about that. You can't unhear it. You may think about it when you don't want to think about it. Right? So I generally don't tell people. Now, that makes people wonder, like, well, then how in the hell do you get into this, right? And the answer is, like, the cases trickle in. Like, when I was a baby doctor or student doctor, like, I was in a maximum security mental hospital, but they gave me, like, the easier case, something that wasn't quite as tragic, right? And then you're like, whew, and that really messes with you because you haven't seen anything like that. You're like, wow, that's horrible, right? And then the next case might be a little worse. And so the tragedy kind of trickles in and allows you to figure out like how you're going to deal with it as a person, right? And not every forensic psychologist does a great job with that. I can tell you at the conference, I was going like 50-50 when I was looking at everyone. It's like, you're doing okay, and you handle the stress pretty well, and you're a well-adjusted person, you're a functioning alcoholic, right? And you could just kind of see with some people that they were not doing okay. And the level of like secondary traumatic stress, STS, is huge in forensic psychologists. So like one of the things you need to learn is how to take care of yourself. Like that's, in fact, that's the best thing that you can do as a psychologist, is like be objective about your own behaviors and your own thought process so that you don't mess things up and you actually take care of yourself. So suffice to say, like whatever you think is horrible, it's probably not as bad as the stuff that any forensic psychologist has had to deal with, right? But I want you to be able to like self-select into that. I just don't want to put it out there in a room full of people. And some people might not necessarily want that information. Like, go start doing it, and you'll find out where the line is for you. And you'll be like, this is too much. I don't want to do this. Right? Like, let me give you, people think they want to know, right? 80% of police officers who fire their weapon, just who fire it, not who fire it at a person and kill them, right? 80% of police officers who fire their weapon will not be a police officer in 5 years. They quit. Right? So you see things on TV and you're like, oh man, like that's super intense. That looks so cool. But the reality of firing your weapon and what that means when it strikes another human being is not what it is on TV. And 80% of people who do that, who are officers, are like, I'm out. I can't do this anymore. Right? It's taken too much of a toll on me and too much of a toll on my family. So The short answer is no, I'm not going to tell you. But rest assured, it's probably worse than anything that you could imagine. And everyone's got their own way of dealing with it, right? I like to take hikes. I spend time with my family. Sometimes I drink more than I should, right? Like, it all depends. Some days are better than other days. But I know, like, when things are starting to build up and I need to, like, start dealing with it and either talking to somebody about it or exercising more, whatever it be. Usually it's my wife who's like, you need to go for a bike ride? You need to go for a run? I'm like, oh, I must be an asshole right now. I'm being just a miserable bastard, right? And I know that, like, oh yeah, it's because I'm doing this case and I haven't dealt with the stuff yet, right? So it's hard, but trust me, you don't want to know. So with that, though, if you've got other questions, I'm happy to answer any other questions people might have. Did anybody write anything down, or did they?
Yeah, I have some here.
Okay.
Haley can walk around with a mic if anybody is.
What are some of the ones that are there? I'll start with that. Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
How in-depth, if you do like a forensic minor or concentration, how
Mhm.
in-depth do you get with learning about who you listen to?
So the question was like, how in depth do you get with a forensic minor? I have to cater to both groups because the classes are like 50% psych, 50% crim, right? So I don't assume that anybody knows anything. So there's moments where the crim people are like, I already know this shit. And the psych people feel the same way. But we kind of have to cover. So you can come in without knowing anything and be okay. That being said, with like the depth, I just got a text message last week from a former Mason undergrad who's now like a fourth year doctoral student. So she'll be a doctor next year. And there's a lot to learn in a doctoral program, so there's not a lot of electives. Like in 5 years, there's maybe like 2 elective courses, right? And she's taking a forensic psych course now, and she said, I'm in a forensic psych course at my doctoral work, and I'm bored as hell because we already covered all of this crap at Mason. So it's in-depth enough, but I mean, I would ask somebody who's been in the class, but I don't think anybody in the classes feels overwhelmed, right? Is that true? Because you're in the class now. She's in the, yeah. So we try and like, I want to walk you through, the goal is to like walk you through a forest that you've never been through before, but also with 0 chance of you getting lost along the way. What were some of the ones that were written there?
One was about how you got into it. So how did you know you wanted to do forensic psych when you first started?
No. Did I know I wanted to do forensic psych? Absolutely not. Like, I'll spare you the long and boring story, but short answer was my first career was as a musician and a studio engineer. And then a whole bunch of stuff happened. None of it like tragic. I'm just gonna skip the story, right? Basically, I started teaching music because I didn't want to work at the studio anymore. Because with a studio, like you own a studio or you don't. Those are the 2 rungs of the ladder in the studio. And I was working with like 50-year-old guys who were doing my job, and I was like, I don't want to do this. So I started teaching music at a school for kids with special needs. And I thought that meant that all the kids had like Down syndrome or an intellectual disability, but I was wrong. And they weren't going to correct me because they needed a teacher. And it was middle school juvie. Like, it was full physical restraint, middle school juvie. And I was totally unprepared for that. But I had to learn about those kids, and I had to learn how to deal with those kids because I needed to pay rent. Like, it wasn't some altruistic thing, like I just needed a job. And that got me into like trauma. It got me into the criminal justice system. It got me into like oppositional defiant disorder, antisocial traits, talking to the social workers, which got me into psych. And then when I was in my first year of doctoral work, I thought I wanted to be a therapist, and then I started doing therapy at a site, and I was like, this is boring, and I can't do this. And then I found, I got placed at a jail, and I thought that they like picked me because I was like a good candidate. Like, I went in for my interview as an intern, and they're like, the guy was like, oh, this is where you'll be sitting, and you're gonna do this, and I'm like, I must be killing this job interview, right? Like, he's already talking like it's mine. I was the only person that applied. I was the only one that wanted to be in a jail. Because in my head, I was like, I've already done juvie. Like, how bad can jail be? And then I got there, and he quit, and I was left on my own. It was horrible. But it was also super fun. So like the first site I was ever in was a jail, and then I was hooked. It was like forensics. I didn't want to do anything else after that. But yeah, that's like the short. I had no grand plans of even becoming a psychologist. If you would have talked to me at 19, you would have been like, this kid's an idiot and the world is doomed. Yeah.
The others are, one is about how do you analyze patient behavior without biases, and the other is similarly, well, how do you reconcile your work with your own ethical values?
Okay, yeah.
What the kind of work you're doing.
I'll answer both those with one case. So this, let's just say, I can't give you a ton of information about this because it's still being litigated, but like white nationalist, horrible person, okay? We'll leave it at that. Like the kind of person who, when you speak out against his white nationalist views, will publish things online and will dox you and will call on other white nationalists to decapitate your grandkids and put their heads in a cooler and deliver them to you at work, okay? So, real charmer. And so I get asked to evaluate that guy. And I have some feelings about it, but I'm kind of excited, right? I didn't get into forensics because I'm like, I don't like intense stuff, right? So I took the case, but like, I'm gonna give it, there's a possibility that I'm gonna give an opinion that this guy's not gonna like, and it's gonna hurt his legal case. And in the past, when someone's done that, he's threatened to kill their family, right? So that's obviously in the back of my head when I'm doing that evaluation, that like, this guy is dangerous, right? And what I'll say is, I've talked to more people who've killed people than I can remember at this point, right? However, I've never once had a problem, and I've never once been attacked, and I can only think of like one time in 5 years in maximum security facilities where I was sitting with an inmate in a room, and I was like making a plan for how I was going to get to the door safely and call for help, because I started to get really nervous, right? So usually, most of the people in the criminal justice system understand that like this is part of the game, and it's part of the system, and that you have a role in it. And whenever I meet with someone, no matter what they did, like I always treat them with respect. I always shake their hand. I always listen to their side of things as non-judgmentally as I can. When I leave, I might be like, that was really messed up, and that guy's crazy as hell, right? I may have my own opinions about it, but I treat them with respect, and I have not had a problem doing that. That being said, with the white nationalist, as soon as I submitted my report, 3 days later, someone spray painted FUCKYOU, one letter to each sidewalk block in front of my house. And I was like, okay, all right, that's not a coincidence. Oh, and they also wrote die and put a heart around it. Right? And so my neighbor actually works for the FBI, so it was kind of like, it wasn't right in front of my house, it was like most of it was in front of mine, but the die was in front of his. And so we were both out there one morning like, is this for me or is this for you? Because it was like 3 days after the Mar-a-Lago raid too, so we were like, honestly, it could be either of us. But this particular inmate, he's in a communication management unit, which is like a prison inside a prison that doesn't have any phone lines and no communication to the outside because he's done horrible things on the internet. And all of his conversations and email that he does have access to are monitored in real time. And so I called up the government and I was like, hey, I sent the pictures, like this happened. I called my local police and apologized. Like, look, usually I don't call the police for graffiti, I would just clean it off. And I explained the situation and they were like, yep, you got to look into it, right? And so it turns out that it was nothing. Like in my head, I was like 85% sure it was stupid high schoolers, but I couldn't ignore the other 15%. And like further down the street, there was more spray paint in front of somebody else's house. And there's some like another 100 yards that way that I didn't see earlier. And the government looked through all of his records and he never mentioned my name other than in one email to say he got my report. And that was it. And never mentioned it in any phone calls. They listened to all the phone calls. And so it wasn't anything, right? But that was real. Like that possibility was in the back of my head the whole time I was doing that evaluation. I would like to say that it didn't change my opinion, but the nature of defense mechanisms is that if you know you're using a defense mechanism, they're not working, right? Like defense mechanisms only work because you don't know they're happening. That's why they protect you. So it wasn't an opinion that was going to hurt him. And frankly, like the whole nature of the evaluation was like when the government arrested him, claiming the government caused him PTSD. And admittedly, the government did not have on they didn't give him the white glove treatment when they got him, right? Like they did not treat him well. And frankly, I don't care because I know what he did. However, you still can't do that, right? Like that's not allowed. Like if you do it to him, then you're going to do it to somebody else, and so you can't do it. Like that's the rule. It doesn't matter like my personal opinion is on that. Like, well, okay, I don't feel that bad personally, but like as a member of society, like no, you can't, because if we let you get away with that, then you're going to do it to somebody else who I love eventually, right? And so like it all gets very complicated, and I consult with other forensic psychologists kind of all the time and talk to them about cases, and we'll get together. It's not anything formal, like we'll just get together at the dog park or something like that, or for a drink and talk, but like you got to work through that stuff, and the only way to do it is to like bounce it off of other people who are in the same situation and can understand that kind of thing. And you develop that network as you go. Yeah.
We're a bunch more come in now, but we're almost out of time. So there was, well, some of them you covered with just the story. So, but can somebody with masters in psychology get into the field at all?
No. So if you have a master's in, earmuffs. If you have a master's in psychology, I don't see the use, right? And that's just my personal opinion, because like a master's in psych isn't going to get you a license, right? You can't meet with the patient, you can't do evaluations, you can't be called a therapist unless you have a license. A master's in clinical social work will get you a license. A master's in counseling will get you a license. And Marymount actually has a counseling program that's a forensic psych program. Like you do a master's in forensic psych, but you also get a master's in counseling, and you're a licensed counselor. And you can do both in like 3 years, and it's a great program. We've had a bunch of Mason students go there. But if you just get a master's degree in clinical psych or a master's degree in forensic psych, then you don't have a license. So you're only going to be allowed to do the job that an undergrad's going to do. You just get paid like $2,000 or $3,000 more a year to do the job, which probably doesn't even cover the loan payment from your master's degree. So, like, yeah. And if you're a law enforcement officer, like a master's in forensic psych may be useful, but like you can go be an officer or an agent for the government with an undergraduate degree. And my advice is always like hold off on the master's, because most of the cops that I know that go back for master's degrees do not go back for forensic psych. Like you're not going to get a forensic psych master's and like the FBI is going to be like, oh, thank God you're here. We've been waiting for you. Like, no, they got gun-toting PhDs. Like they already hired your professors, right? So they're not waiting for you. And most police officers who go up in the rank and are now captain or lieutenant, like they wind up getting master's degrees that are MBAs or like masters in public administration, because they're not out running around chasing bad guys anymore. Like they're managing 40 officers and they're like, I don't know how to do this. I'm totally overwhelmed. And so the thing that will help you get up in those organizations might not be a master's in forensic psych. So if it's law enforcement, I say like hold off until you know like something specific is going to help you. And if you're a psych student, then the master's is if it's a stepping stone to PhD, then great. If it's not, then you're just going to do the same job you were going to do as an undergrad. So I'll let you guys go. My email is there. Like I'm happy to answer any and all questions that people have about forensic psych, or if you have questions about the forensic program, just let me know. Like literally feel free to email me, and if I can't answer quickly and it turns into like something that's a conversation, then we'll meet and we'll talk. I'm happy to do that. So yeah, send me any of your questions.